We're in a very interesting series as we're looking at King David, and we're calling this After God's Own Heart. And it's interesting as David comes into that kingship that he's replacing Saul. And of course, the prophet Samuel told Saul that he was chosen when he was small in his own eyes, but there was a pride that lifted him up. And then there's a statement in 1 Samuel 13 where God refers to David finding a man after his own heart, and David is that man. And that has always stood out to me, but we read later on in the discussion of the kings in 2 Chronicles, it talks about how the eyes of the Lord are going through the entire earth to and fro looking for someone whose heart is loyal to them or after their own heart. So it's like something that surprises me that the creator of the entire universe is looking to and fro and saying, is there anyone out there that is leaning into me, that's coming after my own heart, that's loyal to me? And so David was such a person, and that's where it's kind of fun as we look at the songs he sang and that he wrote, and we see a little bit of his heart in the Bible. We have probably one of the larger biographical sketches of anyone is that of David and of his life. And we're going to look a little bit into that this morning. Psalms 23 we got into last week, where David does a reflection on his life. But the very foundation of his life, he grabbed that truth that he had a good shepherd. It's like peering ahead, I realized that he probably realized that there was a good shepherd that was going to give his life for the sheep and that he needed to know his voice and follow him, not just as a shepherd boy or as a shepherd of sheep, but even as a king. And that was his foundational rock that he built his life on. So we looked at that last week. This week, one thing about our hearts, it's interesting how our hearts respond in tough times. And David went through them. He failed. I think that's one thing that stands out to all of us, that David failed in a big way, adultery and murder. But he also went through some very hard times. And God observed his heart in the good times and in the bad times, the fast times and the very slow times. So today I want to look at David's hardest part of his life, of great adversity that he went through. And when we think of adversity, I think it's relative to where we're at in life. I remember going to Burger King years back. This is probably 20 years back, and I'm sitting at a table, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this kid just fall out of the bench. He's with his family onto the floor, just flat on the floor. And right away, this all happens in a split second. I'm thinking, has he had a seizure? And of course I'm thinking, the parents need to get down there and make sure he's not swallowing his tongue. And I'm thinking, do they need help, pulling his tongue out? And then it's like, should I be calling 911? What's happening? And then about that time, I realized there was something maybe deeper going on. And as it turned out, he didn't get his burger his way. It wasn't his way. Somehow a brush of mustard went across that sesame seed bun, and when he saw that, it was like his life was over, and he fell on the floor. And so often we have those times. Maybe you got that haircut, that I remember my mom, my sister, there was great sorrow in our house sometimes when they got a bad haircut, when they went to the beauty salon, and it was like, oh my goodness. And I remember I married Lori, and she had a bad haircut, and she didn't respond that way. I think, man, this is going to be a great marriage, But we have those times where we go through stuff. I remember when I was in 10th grade, we moved, and I had just gotten the first girlfriend in my life. Finally found a girl that liked me. I liked her, and we were a thing. We were boyfriend and girlfriend, and then I had to move from South Florida to North Florida, and left my best friend and my girlfriend behind, and I felt like the world ended. Another time I remember I had a car that I liked a lot, invested in a lot, and in 1 week, I blew up 98% of my net worth, and I just blew that car up. And it was just like, whoa, that was really bad. And next week I borrowed my mom and dad's car, and I blew their car up, and I blew up about 50% of their net worth. We were poor. And sometimes financial things can seem like the biggest adversity. We were so poor that, when a winter bug would go around, we'd have to tie a string to aspirin and take turns. It was just a tough period of time. And you look at that and you think, well, that's adversity. But as life has gone on, I realized that those were just small things. And a lot of what we face in life are more circumstantial things, things that maybe we have maybe caused, or we just go into a season in our life that's just tough and there's a lot going on. I've gone through kind of a busy time taking care of my parents and, building a home, moving up here, fixing their home and, working up there with the bowling alley, redoing that and getting a church started, stepping out as senior pastor. It's just been a weird circumstantial period of time, but it's not a time of great adversity, because when there's adversity, it's more like you're being hunted. You have an adversary that is hunting you. And so we're going to look at Psalms 3 today, but before we get to the psalm, and it's a response to the adversity that David ran into. I mean, it's big time adversity. And it starts with David's firstborn. He had, in about the 13th chapter, it talks about a number of sons that were born to him, and his firstborn son was Amnon. And he was heir to the throne. And then there was a second-born son that apparently didn't live too long, because you don't see him show up in the other genealogical records. And then his third-born was Absalom. And these two individuals, their lives cross. And so let's read a description of Absalom. I think it's kind of funny or kind of interesting. Now, in all Israel, there was no one who was as praised as much as Absalom for his good looks. I mean, he was just praised for his good looks. I mean, it was kind of like on all the Hebrew novels, romance novels, there they had a picture of him. I mean, he was the one, before Fabio was, he was, And from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut the hair of his head at the end of every year, and apparently this was a big ceremony, he would get in front of everyone, cut his hair because it was too heavy on him. When it cut, he weighed his hair 200 shekels according to the king's standards, about 4 or 5 pounds of hair. And so I have the sense that he kind of was big-headed. I feel like he was lifted up and everyone praised his looks. Well, Absalom had a sister, and we read about it in 2 Samuel 13, 1 and 2. And it says this: after this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister. They had the same mom. They had apparently some hot princess of some king that David married, and her name was Tamar. And Amnon, the firstborn heir of the throne. Now Absalom has moved to the second in line because the second son died, apparently. And so Amnon, the son of David, loved her. And Amnon was so distressed over his sister Tamar that he became sick, for she was a virgin, and it was improper for Amnon to do anything to her. He could have married her. We find out later he could have married her. He could have honored her and married her, but he was so in love. He just had to have her. And I think this is kind of interesting. It's more lust than love, and he concocts this scheme, lures her into his bedroom, and he rapes her. Interesting verse is 2 Samuel 13:5. After he rapes her, we read this. Then Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Arise, be gone." He kicked her out. He showed her no honor whatsoever. And this is a truth in itself. A lot of young people in here and have been a part of this church and a part of our campuses. And I just want to warn the young people, it doesn't matter how long someone tells you, "I love you," or how much they wiggle their eyes. Love is a commitment. Like, I want to live my life with you. And for a man, it calls for that man to lay down his life and to die for that woman. And he doesn't show this, and he rapes her. It turns out very negatively. And Absalom, her brother, it doesn't sit well with him. So he schemes up a plan, and he invites Amnon over to his house, and he kills Amnon. And of course, this brings some division between him and King David, and there's some household trouble that starts to take place, and some things start to happen in the kingdom. David has aged a little bit, and we pick up in 1 Samuel 15, 1 through 6, some of the stuff that Absalom starts to do. After this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Not only, let his hair blow and look really, really sharp, and he's going down the road, and he's got 50 men running before his chariot. Now, Absalom would rise early and stand by the way of the gate. So it was when anyone came or had a lawsuit, came to the king for a decision, he would cut him off in the pass. And Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, "Your servant is from such and such a place, tribe of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right. I think I can win your case. I think you have judgment. Let me deal with it. No deputy of the king will to hear you." But Absalom would say, "Oh, if I were judge, if I was the king of the land, and everyone who had any suit or cause would come to me, then I would give him justice." And so it was, when anyone would come near and bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. And in this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. And it's like he set himself up, and these people are coming up to Jerusalem, and he'd want to get a selfie with them. I mean, he had some pictures of his beautiful self, and he said, "Hey, I'll give you a signed, autographed picture of myself." And he says, "Hey, I'll give you my cell phone number if you want to talk with me." And he did all those things and won the hearts of the people. And King David was not totally aware of this. And then in 2 Samuel 15:12 through, we read this: Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from his city, from Gihon. When he offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy grew stronger, for the people of Absalom continued to increase in number. Now a messenger came to David saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel with Absalom." So David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise, let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly, bring disaster upon us, and strike the city with the edge of sword." So here's King David, and he's in the kingdom, and he's not aware that this son that he's had some disagreements with, his very handsome son that killed the firstborn, now Absalom is in place for the throne, that there's a coup going on, and it's being led by his thirdborn, who now is the firstborn heir to the son. And so we want to read Psalms 3, and this is what this Psalms comes from. It's at this time David is running for his life, and let's read Psalms 3, starting right there with the very first verse. "Lord, how are they increase who trouble me? Many are those that rise up against me. Many of those that say, there is no help for him in God." I mean, David had gone through a lot of struggles, but it was like, this one, David, you're not going to recover from. There's no hope. "But you, O Lord, are a shield, my glory, and the one who lifts up my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. I laid me down and I slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me round about." And this isn't a preacher's count. This is actually happening. There was an army pursuing after David. All of a sudden, he was on the wanted poster, dead or alive. There was a complete coup that was coming for him, and he was surrounded. "Save me, O Lord, for you have struck all my enemies on the cheekbone. You have broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is upon your people." So David walks in to adversity. And like I said, adversity is different from the circumstantial stuff. Adversity is where you become the hunted. There is someone wanting to take you out. There's someone that is wanting deliberately to ruin your life. There's someone that wants to get you fired. There is someone that wants to take everything you have, that wants to destroy your company, that wants to destroy your relationships with other people. And here's the recipe for big-time adversity. Number one, this is where it hits hard. It's close to home. Adversity often hits very close to home. And here's his son. His son's coming. It involves his flesh and blood. This is why divorce is so hard, because it's your flesh and your blood. The family is being ripped apart, and all of a sudden it gets really hard to deal with. It involves trusted friends. David's at a place where he's getting what friends he has, and he's getting out of Jerusalem for his life, and he doesn't know who are his trusted friends. Friends like even his counselor that he would go to that was close to him for years had given him counsel, and he went to his office and talked with him, and all of a sudden that person wasn't there, and he didn't know if this person's for him or that person's for him. All of a sudden all that dried up, and he lost all his trusted friends. And that's one thing that's real hard about adversity, is sometimes it affects your friends. It affects the people you work with. It affects the people that you've done life with, the people that maybe you went to high school with, and all of a sudden they're not on your side, or they're against you, or it's just cloudy. That's another part of the recipe. And then it involves many voices. During a time of adversity where you're not sure who your friends are and your family's against you, all of a sudden these voices start to come up, some real, some not real. But the theme of the voices is there's no hope for you and God. You need to turn your back on God. He is not going to help you out. This is big, this is bad, and this is ugly, and you have no hope. And, quit, leave, run, and this is what's coming down upon David. And this is where we want to get into the truths of the must for adversity. Because I want to tell you, not everyone survives adversity. Not everyone, things don't go well if we don't handle adversity right. Many times people leave their faith. They leave maybe their church. They leave, they break away with their family, never to talk with them again. It's a very dangerous times. And there's some must that we need to understand. And we see it in these Psalms. We'll start out, maybe go back to Psalms, that first slide. Lord, how do they increase that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. Many are say, there is no hope for him in God. It's like all of a sudden, you don't know who to turn to. And what David learned is we must position ourselves in God quickly. He knew that. I mean, right away, it's like everyone's against me. And what David does is he turns and he goes behind the shield of his Lord God, behind the shield of his Abba Father. He gets in the presence of God. He shuts out all the voices, and he gets with God very quickly. He had learned over his life, there's several times this happened, that he had to encourage himself in God, and you get with God quickly because those voices will drown out God's voice. And when we hit adversity and you don't know who to turn to, we need to turn to the Lord. Psalms 91 talks about getting under the shadow of the Almighty. That's where you find that protection. They say in Israel since about the 7th of October that over 10,000 missiles have been fired into Israel from the surrounding, from the north now, from every angle. Missiles have been fired. About 10,000 in just a little bit over a month, about a month have come in. And they say the warning time, once you hear that missile, once you hear the alarm, you've got about a minute and 30 seconds to run for your life. I know we kind of, out where we live, sometimes we'll hear the helicopter come over, the hospital helicopter, and we'll kind of stop and look for it. But can you imagine just the missiles that are coming in? You realize, hey, we need to run for our life. And that's how serious it is when you run into adversity like that, or when any of us run into adversity like that. We need to run into God's presence quickly. And the second thing, it's kind of interesting. We must rest and refresh in the Lord. Adversity can take you out physically. It can take you out mentally. But as David got in the presence of the Lord and he got under the shadow of the Almighty, it tells us here that I cried to the Lord. Let's turn to the second slide. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. It was like God gave him a supernatural rest. It kind of reminds me of Jesus. In the middle of the storm on the Sea of Galilee, where was Jesus? He was asleep in the bow of the boat. He was just resting because he had that confidence that God had it under control. He had that confidence that God was with him. And even in the midst of crazy adversity, he cast that care on the Lord, and he rested. And I think that's real important because adversity, when you hit it, it's going to pull all your emotions, and you need to move forward, and you need to move with God. The third thing, we must follow God's leading in adversity. We must follow his leading. I mean, he's faced, there's 10,000 troops around him. What do I do? Where do I go? What direction I could go? And this is where we not only need to get in God's presence of the Good Shepherd, we not only need to get under his protection where his rod and his staff are there to protect us, but we get in a place where we can hear his voice, where we can know his voice and know what to do. And each situation is different. When he faced Goliath, who was, there was that adversary, Goliath, the Spirit of God said, run to him. Everyone else was melting away, but he ran to the adversity. And also in this case, God led him and protected him, and then there came a day where God says it's time to fight. It's time to move forward. In the New Testament, we have another weapon, and that's the weapon of prayer, forgiveness, praying and blessing our enemy. And I've run into adversity, one time really strong, and it's very unique. It was, I don't know, probably 15, 16 years ago. And I'm a type of person, maybe like you, that, we want everyone to like us. We want to please people. We want to serve people. And then all of a sudden you run into something where you have to deal with some people issues, and it begins to backfire. And I went through a period of time where it was just like one thing after another started going wrong. And I had to deal with some individuals and make some stands and deal with some tough situations. And it wasn't received well by everyone. And many voices started rising up. And, I remember my emails filled up and criticism began to fill up. And I'd have people call and make an appointment with me, and they'd have a prophetic word for me, how that you're walking away from God and you need to leave, you need to quit. And it just got real tough. And I remember going to some restaurants with Lori out to eat, and there would be people that come over our table and just kind of rebuke us and tell us what we were doing was wrong. And it was just like there was one issue, and then when that kind of settled down, there was another issue. And after that, there was like 6 separate issues that hit. And it went on for several years. I think it went on for 6 years, 6 months, and 6 days. It was a long time. And we were just so worn out. And during that time, everything in me wanted to quit. I just wanted to quit. I just wanted to get out of there. And I think if I would have quit, it would have affected the church. But I knew I needed to hang on. And we started going through drive-thrus, and whenever all these voices would come, there were so many times I'd have to close my door and get back with God and find that place of rest. And I'll be honest, sometimes I did good with it. Other times I didn't do good. I had a lot of sleepless nights, but I kept going to God and seeking for his wisdom. And about the only wisdom that I got was, don't quit. Just keep loving people. Keep going on. And so David, in this, he gets with God, and that time came that God said, you've got to deal with it. And his son was involved. And it's hard when it affects family. I know going through that adversity I went through, it affected my kids. I remember one time talking with my kids, and they said, I don't want anything to do with church anymore. I can't believe how hostile and what people say, what Christians say, and, I've had it. I don't want to be in church anymore. And I would try to say, you get several that said, what about this person? They're pretty neat. What about this person? They're pretty neat. But they just said, I don't want anything to do with church. And then, when they kind of left and got upset, I started getting emails like, you need to step out of ministry now because your kids aren't following the Lord. You need to step out of ministry. So it's just a hard time. And this is some of the stuff that happens with adversity. It hits you in your very soul. It hits you in your family. It hits you in so many areas, but we can't let it affect our relationship with God. And we got to slow down, get in his presence, find our rest in him, and find our marching orders with him. And that's what David did. And David had to deal with that situation. And it ended up costing his son's life, but it was put back together. And one big part of it is this last point. We must focus on and fight for others in adversity. At the very end, the very last slide there, and the third Psalms there, in the 8th verse, it says, salvation belongs to you. Your blessing is upon your people. And we must focus on and fight for others. It's so easy when you get in adversity to take it personally and just say, it's about me, and my feelings are hurt, my emotions are hurt, but you got to keep looking at the people. I remember during that time, I'd keep looking at that next generation. I'm thinking, if I quit, I'm giving up on them. I need to hold on until the ship rights itself. And sometimes we hit those times, and we've got to look at the people that are around and fight for them and fight for their cause and not give up. This is an interesting message. It's an interesting psalm. It's an interesting truth, because in life, there'll be those times that adversity comes down the pike. I think of our young people, and, you know, whether you realize it or not, there's a little bit of a shelter around your life, but you hit those times, especially as you start to walk with God and you start walking away from your parents and you start walking out into life, that there's times that adversity will come. And you'll have some trusted friends, maybe a boyfriend that you've liked for many years or many months, or a girlfriend or a best friend, and all of a sudden some adversity will come. And sometimes it has to do with God, and they will make a stand that you need to leave your faith. You need to give up on God. He won't help you. You need to move away from God, or especially when you hit a hard time. And I just want you to hear this, that there'll come a day where you hit that, and it's like you're almost bitter and you're upset at God. I believe that you'll remember this message and not run away from God, but run to God. And sometimes it means you have to leave your friends or create a new group of friends in that adversity. But it's so important to do. And I think as a body of believers, as Americans, we've lived such a safe life. I think of cultures and around the world, even today, that even to declare your faith means that there's going to be a price on your head. There's a chance that you might lose your kids, might be taken away from you because you have certain beliefs that don't match up with everyone else. There comes times where, hey, we're going to confiscate your property. We're going to persecute you. And I feel like there is a change in the environment, so to speak. There's a change in our country. And we've got to realize that we need to come quickly into God's presence. We need his wisdom during these days like never before. And I want to encourage us as we close out this service to think about what it looks like to run quickly to get into God's presence. What does it mean to shut out all the voices and focus in on God, where even in a room like this that you can focus in on God and you don't realize there's a person to your right or to your left, or there's a voice over here saying this, or there's a situation saying this, but you focus in on God and you don't let anything else interrupt that, and you get into his presence and get things right in your heart with him, and you rest in that presence, and you still yourself, and you still all those voices to where you can hear God's voice. We need to not wait till we hit adversity to do that, but David had exercised and walked in that many times throughout his life, getting before the Good Shepherd, listening to the heart of his Father. And as believers, I think we're approaching days where we need to learn to do that on a regular basis. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for your goodness. I thank you for your presence in this room. Dear Heavenly Father, I pray that we'll realize that in life we might face adversity. There might be adversaries that want to hunt us down. But dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your presence. We thank you for the shadow of your wing. We thank you for your wisdom. In Jesus' name. And they all said,